The tension in the private dining room was suffocating. Witnesses claimed Princess Charlotte, just a child, had been subjected to a whispering campaign so cruel it would have broken a lesser spirit. But her mother, Catherine, the Princess of Wales, didn't just intervene, she dismantled the established order. In a moment of raw fury that silenced the entire room, Catherine crossed a line that no one in the royal family ever dares to cross. She was no longer the people's princess, she was a mother on the warpath. Before we uncover what really happened, tell us in the comments, what do you think is the biggest misunderstanding about this story? The royal calendar is a carefully curated illusion of unity. Every handshake, every smile, every shared laugh at a public engagement is orchestrated to project an image of a family that stands together, unbreakable and eternal. But behind the gilded doors of private royal residences, the dynamics are often as fractured and volatile as any family struggling to hold itself together. The tension that has simmered between the Duchess of Cornwall and the Princess of Wales was not a secret, but it was a quiet war fought with passive-aggressive glances and strategically timed exits. Everyone who worked within the inner circle knew that these two women, bound by the crown, were never destined to be friends. However, no one expected the conflict to explode over a child. It happened during a private luncheon at Clarence House, a gathering that was supposed to be a minor affair to discuss charitable initiatives. Princess Charlotte, at the tender age of 8, was present, as Catherine had been teaching her the importance of royal duties from a young age. The little princess, known for her spirited personality and striking resemblance to her late grandmother, was seated near the head of the table. According to sources close to the royal household, what began as a seemingly benign comment from Camilla regarding Charlotte's posture and manners quickly escalated into something far more sinister. Camilla, the queen consort, was overheard making a remark that witnesses described as deeply critical and belittling, suggesting that Charlotte was too loud and too opinionated for a future princess. The atmosphere shifted instantly. Those in attendance described the air as turning ice-cold as the weight of Camilla's words landed. The bullying didn't stop with a single, cutting remark. It was reported that Camilla continued to make snide observations about Charlotte's behavior, comparing her unfavorably to other royal children and implying that her parents had not instilled the necessary discipline. It was a classic tactic of psychological diminishment, designed to undermine the confidence of a child in a public setting. For the staff, it was an excruciatingly awkward moment, a reminder of the archaic and often cruel pecking order that exists within the monarchy. For Catherine, who has always viewed her role as a mother as her most sacred duty, it was the breaking point. But what made the incident truly explosive was Charlotte's reaction. The young princess, known for her fiery temperament, did not cry. Instead, she looked to her mother, her face a mask of confusion and hurt. That silent plea for protection was a catalyst. It was in that moment that Catherine realized that Camilla's animosity, long simmering beneath the surface, was no longer being directed at her. It had found a new, defenseless target. The line between protocol and protection had been crossed, and in the world of the monarchy, there are some lines that, once crossed, can never be redrawn. As the luncheon drew to a close, the tension was palpable. Catherine remained composed, but those close to her could see the fire behind her eyes. She excused herself and her daughter gracefully, but her departure was not one of retreat. It was the calculated move of a commander leaving a battlefield to plan her counterattack. The whispers of the incident spread through the palace corridors like wildfire, reaching the ears of the senior royals before the evening had even fully settled. What many fail to realize is that Catherine is not just a fashion icon or a dutiful wife. She is a fiercely protective mother who has endured a decade of public scrutiny with stoic grace. Yet, her silence regarding Camilla's petty cruelties was never born of weakness. It was a strategy of patience, waiting for the moment when her reaction would carry the most weight. She had watched Camilla slowly reposition herself from the other woman to the queen consort, enduring the subtle jabs with a tight smile. But Charlotte was the third generation. Charlotte was where Catherine drew the line. The incident had cracked the fragile veneer of royal harmony, exposing a deep fracture that no amount of PR spin could fully conceal. Behind the closed doors of Kensington Palace, the real storm was about to break. Catherine was no longer just the queen in waiting. She was a mother backed into a corner, and when she finally rose to the challenge, the entire hierarchy of the monarchy was set to be shaken to its very core. The whispers had reached the palace, but the true shockwave was still forming. It was only a matter of time before the gentle facade of the Princess of Wales would fall, and the fury of a mother protecting her child would take its place. If you're enjoying this story, subscribe so you never miss our next documentary. Catherine has spent years mastering the art of composure. She is a woman who understands that every facial expression is analyzed, every gesture scrutinized. She has been trained to smile through criticism, to nod through condescension, and to walk gracefully through the minefield of royal protocol. But when the line between duty and family is crossed, the training becomes irrelevant. In the immediate aftermath of that luncheon, Catherine did what she always does. She maintained her composure, excused herself and Charlotte with practiced grace, and retreated from the battlefield. But inside the walls of Kensington Palace, the facade was crumbling. Those close to the princess described the moment she arrived home as a release of tension years in the making. The doors of the palace apartment had barely closed when Catherine's controlled demeanor gave way to something far more visceral. She was not just angry. She was wounded, not for herself, but for her daughter. Charlotte, a child who bears the weight of a future crown on her small shoulders, had been publicly humiliated by her step-grandmother. For a mother like Catherine, who has spoken extensively about the importance of nurturing children's mental health and emotional well-being, this was not a matter of protocol. It was a violation of her very identity as a parent. What followed was an unprecedented confrontation. Catherine, typically so careful to defer to the hierarchy of the monarchy, picked up the phone and made a call that sent shockwaves through the royal household. She demanded an explanation from Camilla, not through intermediaries, not through palace aides, but directly. According to sources close to the incident, the Princess of Wales did not hold back. She accused Camilla of overstepping, of using her position to undermine a child who had done nothing to warrant such behavior. The conversation was described as intense and deeply uncomfortable, with Catherine making it crystal clear that she would not tolerate her children being used as pawns in Camilla's ongoing struggle for relevance. The audacity of Catherine's response should not be underestimated. Within the firm, standing up to the queen consort, the wife of the monarch, is practically unheard of. Yet Catherine, with the fury of a mother bear, tore through that unwritten rule. She reminded Camilla, in no uncertain terms, that Charlotte is second in line to the throne and, more importantly, a child. "I will not allow anyone," one source paraphrased her as saying, "to make my daughter feel less than she is." The call, which lasted longer than anyone had anticipated, ended with Catherine making a threat that reverberated through the palace walls. If Camilla ever directed such behavior at her children again, she would ensure that the entire world knew the truth. The aftermath of that call was immediate. Camilla, unused to being confronted so directly by a younger member of the family, was reportedly taken aback. But Catherine was far from finished. The confrontation was not just a warning, it was a declaration of war. The quiet rivalry that had simmered between these two women for years had finally erupted into the open, and the stakes had never been higher. Catherine had proven that she was not just the people's princess in name, she was a force to be reckoned with. Yet, while Catherine had won this battle, the war was far from over. Behind the scenes, another chapter was quietly unfolding, one that would see the king himself caught in the crossfire and the fragile power balance of the monarchy thrown into chaos. If this story surprised you, share it with someone who would enjoy uncovering forgotten Hollywood stories. The confrontation between Catherine and Camilla had sent shockwaves through the royal household, but perhaps the most telling response came from the one person whose silence spoke volumes: King Charles. According to sources close to the incident, the king was made aware of the exchange almost immediately, and his reaction was not what anyone had expected. Rather than defending his wife, Charles reportedly offered a private apology to Catherine, a gesture that signaled a seismic shift in the palace power dynamic. For a monarch to publicly acknowledge fault within his own household, even privately, was unprecedented. But Charles, who has always shared a unique bond with his daughter-in-law, seemed to recognize that Camilla had overstepped in a way that threatened the stability of the crown itself. The king's silence during the initial incident at Clarence House had been deafening. Witnesses claimed that he sat motionless as Camilla directed her barbs at young Charlotte, neither intervening nor diffusing the tension. It was a moment that left many in the room questioning where the king's true loyalties lay. Was he protecting his wife, or was he simply paralyzed by the impossibility of the situation? Whatever the reason, his subsequent apology to Catherine suggested that he had come to a difficult realization. The queen consort had crossed a line, and his failure to act had made the situation infinitely worse. For Catherine, the apology was a validation of her fury. For the rest of the royal family, it was a warning that the balance of power within the monarchy was shifting. Behind the scenes, William was quietly orchestrating his own response. The Prince of Wales, typically measured and cautious, had watched the situation unfold with growing alarm. He had witnessed his mother's struggles within the royal institution, and he had no intention of allowing his own family to suffer the same fate. Sources indicate that William delivered an ultimatum to his father. If Camilla ever repeated such behavior, the consequences would be severe. It was a moment of defiance that echoed through the palace corridors, a reminder that William is not merely Charles's heir, but the protector of his own household. The king was caught between his wife and his son, and the pressure was becoming unbearable. The aftermath of the luncheon was not a quiet return to normalcy, but the opening act of a drama that would reshape the royal family's internal dynamics. The king's apology, William's ultimatum, and Catherine's unyielding stance had created an entirely new landscape. The royal household was no longer a unified front. It was a house divided, with the Waleses on one side and the queen consort on the other. And at the heart of this fracture lay a question that would define the monarchy for years to come. Who truly holds the power, the monarch or the future king? The cracks in the royal foundation were deepening. And as the weeks passed, a protective wall began to rise around the Prince and Princess of Wales and their children, a wall that would leave the queen consort increasingly isolated. If you're enjoying this story, subscribe so you never miss our next documentary. While Catherine's confrontation sent shockwaves through the royal household, it was William's response that would permanently alter the family's power structure. The Prince of Wales, typically measured and diplomatic, had watched his wife endure Camilla's subtle cruelties for years. He had observed the queen consort's pattern of psychological diminishment, the way she wielded her position to undermine those she perceived as threats. But when the target became his daughter, his only daughter, something fundamental shifted within him. Sources close to the palace have revealed that William delivered an ultimatum to his father that left the king with an impossible choice. The Prince of Wales made it unequivocally clear, if Camilla ever directed such behavior toward his children again, there would be severe consequences. This was not a passive request for better behavior. It was a declaration that William would not tolerate the same patterns of cruelty that had haunted his own childhood. He had watched his mother, Diana, struggle within the institution, isolated and unsupported. He would not allow history to repeat itself with his own family. The ultimatum reportedly carried significant weight. William made it known that he would not allow Camilla to have unrestricted access to his children. This was not merely a protective measure, it was a calculated move to establish boundaries that had never existed before. The queen consort, who had grown accustomed to wielding influence through her proximity to the king, suddenly found herself facing a wall she could not breach. According to palace insiders, the king was forced to navigate a delicate situation. He had spent decades working to rehabilitate Camilla's image, to position her as a respected queen consort. Yet his relationship with his son and grandchildren was equally precious. The ultimatum placed him squarely in the middle of a conflict he could not resolve without sacrificing something he valued. Some reports suggest that Charles, faced with his son's determination, offered a private apology to Catherine, acknowledging that his wife had overstepped. But perhaps the most revealing aspect of this chapter is what it tells us about William's evolution. For years, he had been seen as the dutiful son, the patient heir, the man who would one day inherit the crown. Yet in this moment, he revealed himself to be something far more formidable. A protector who would place his family above the institution's demands. His ultimatum was not a power grab. It was a line drawn in the sand. And by choosing to enforce that boundary, he signaled to the entire monarchy that the old ways were no longer acceptable. Behind the scenes, another chapter was quietly unfolding. The protective wall William had erected would only strengthen, leaving the queen consort increasingly isolated and the power balance within the family shifting irrevocably toward the Waleses. If this story surprised you, share it with someone who would enjoy uncovering forgotten Hollywood stories. The confrontation that had erupted behind palace walls did not fade quietly into the shadows of royal history. Instead, it marked the beginning of a new era, one in which the balance of power within the monarchy shifted irrevocably. The protective wall that William had erected around his family was not a temporary measure. It was a permanent restructuring of the royal hierarchy. And at the center of this new landscape stood Camilla, the queen consort, increasingly isolated and stripped of the influence she had spent decades cultivating. Sources close to the palace have revealed that the aftermath of the luncheon was nothing short of a Cold War. Camilla, who had grown accustomed to wielding significant influence over her husband's decisions, suddenly found herself sidelined. The king's private apology to Catherine was a devastating blow to Camilla's authority, signaling to the entire household that the queen consort's actions had been deemed unacceptable by the monarch himself. This was not a minor diplomatic incident. It was a seismic shift in the royal power structure. The isolation Camilla experienced was compounded by the growing confidence and visibility of Catherine. The Princess of Wales, having endured months of cancer treatment and emerged with renewed strength, was no longer content to play the role of the silent, dutiful daughter-in-law. Her return to public life was polished, professional, and distinctly queenly. Cortes described the atmosphere between the two women as icy and impossible to ignore, with the royal household reportedly splitting into two distinct camps: Buckingham Palace with Charles and Camilla, and Kensington Palace with William and Catherine. But perhaps the most telling sign of Camilla's diminishing influence was the transformation of her relationship with the Wales children. Reports indicated that William had made it clear that Camilla would not have unrestricted access to his children. This was a protective measure born of necessity, but it was also a profound humiliation for the queen consort. She was no longer seen as a trusted grandmother figure. She was viewed as a potential threat to the emotional well-being of the future king and his siblings. The cracks in the royal foundation were deepening, and the question of Camilla's place in the monarchy's future remained unresolved. As the weeks turned into months, a new battlefront opened, one that would pit Camilla and Catherine against each other in a dispute that threatened to tear the family apart. If you enjoyed this documentary, like the video and subscribe for more true celebrity stories every week.